Well, good morning. How is everyone today? I see that you survived the rain, and a lot of people didn't, and we'll be saying more about that later. But it is so good to see you guys this morning. If you're visiting with us for the first time, we are Be Renewed Church, and for the last few weeks, we have been in a series we've been calling Sticks and Stones, and we've been talking about either words that can build or destroy in our relationships. A series has been based on a verse out of Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21, that says, "The tongue has the power of life and death." Now, this weekend, we're going to wrap up this series by looking at what I think arguably are the three most powerful words in our vocabulary, and they're the words, "I love you." And I want you to understand something about these words. These are words that not only can change the course of your life, these are words, and I don't know if you've watched the news lately, these are words that can actually change the course of our world. And when these words, when they're said from the heart, they can breathe life instead of death into any relationship. Now, to do this today, we're going to be looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is the greatest essay that's ever been written on the topic of love. And I'll go ahead and tell you ahead of time, I think a lot of what we're going to talk about this morning is going to encourage you, but I also feel a lot about what we're going to say is going to challenge you this weekend. But I think we're in for a real treat. So if we're going to talk about the power of love, we should probably come up with the definition for love. And when I talk about love, we're talking about agape love, the Bible's highest form of love. And I think we've all heard the saying that love is a feeling that you feel that you've never felt before. And I've heard that and I thought, well, that could be a lot of things. There's a lot of feelings I have never felt before. This may shock you. I have never given birth. I've never had that feeling. I'm not sure I ever want to have that feeling, right? I've never felt what it's like to be shot. I've never felt what it's like to be stabbed. I've never felt what it's like to have a heart attack. And I would hate to mistake any of those first-time feelings for love, okay? So let me give you a definition for this biblical love, agape. It simply means this: seeking the highest good of the other person. In other words, whoever you're in a relationship with, when you think about agape love, that other person, you're seeking their highest good. And I think the best definition of this kind of love, Paul wrote in a letter to the church at Philippi, Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, he said this: "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself." Verse 4, "Not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others." In other words, love is regarding another person's interest above your own. Now, that's easy to say, but that's hard to do. I mean, to be in a relationship where you say, I'm more concerned about your happiness, your joy, your success, your needs being met than I am about my own. That's the definition. Now, let me just say something about this kind of love. It's not an emotional love, although I will tell you, it will always involve the emotions. But the love we're talking about this weekend is a love that begins in the mind. In other words, when you love this way, you make a conscious decision. I am going to seek the highest good of that person, whether I feel like it or not. I am going to seek their highest good. So it's a decision. And to do that, it's going to require you and me to think more about the other person than we actually think about ourselves. Now, let's be honest. That's where it gets tough. I mean, this idea of putting other people's interest above our own, it sounds really, really good in theory. But can you really love this way? I mean, I can sit up here all day and talk about the what's, what it means to love this way. But if you're like me, I need to know how. I mean, if I'm going to love this way, I need to know what are the risks? What are the specific details? What does it look like to love this way? So let me share with you this morning 4 truths. And I'm going to tell you, these are 4 truths that I'm learning for 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I just want to pass them on to you, but we all need to know these 4 truths and understand these 4 truths when we talk about agape love. I promise you this: if you walk out of here today and this hits home, not just here in your head, but in your heart, it's going to change your relationships. In fact, it can change our church. So first of all, Paul begins by telling us that for Christians, and again, hey, if you're not a Christian this weekend, we're so glad to have you. But you can just sit back and relax because you don't have to love this way, okay? This is what God is calling us to as members of his family. So as for Christians, Paul wants us to understand agape love isn't optional. So what we're going to be talking about this morning is it's not something you can either just take or leave. And I already know, because I'm talking about love, I already know what some of you are thinking. You're like, well, Mike, let me just say, I'm not a people hater, but I don't gush all over people. That's just not my style. But see, in thinking that way, you're assuming that the opposite of love is hate. you're not a people hater. But we all know that the opposite of love isn't hate. What's the opposite of love? It's apathy. Do you remember when we were kids and we wanted to free somebody out of our group, out of our clique? We weren't necessarily mean. We didn't argue. We didn't fight. We just kind of knew, you know what? If you ignore them long enough, they'll go away. And guess what? They always did. In the very same way as Christians, when we treat individuals with apathy, when we treat individuals around us in our life, in our culture, in our circle with indifference, whether we realize it or not, we're declaring to that individual, I really don't love you. I really don't have room. I really don't have space in my life for you. So when you think about this, don't think of it in terms of who do I hate? Think of it more like this. Who am I indifferent towards? Now, why is this so important? Well, it's important, as I said earlier, it's not an option for us. We don't have the luxury as Christians to just be indifferent in our relationship. Let me show you how Paul says it in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1. He says this, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, then he says this in verse 2 of chapter 13. If I have the gift of prophecy, he adds in verse 2, if I have the faith that can move mountains. Verse 3, if I give all I possess to the poor. And then he follows each one of these conditional clauses with three identical statements. He says, but do not have love. But do not have love. But do not have love. Now, obviously, Paul is trying to drive home a very, very simple, but a very, very specific and direct point, and it's this. Paul says, as a Christian, I can do all kinds of stuff that would impress all kinds of people. But if I don't have love, let me show you the last phrase, verse 3, I gain nothing. I gain nothing. Let's say that out loud together. I gain nothing. One more time, you can do better than that. Ready? I gain nothing. Paul says, I can do whatever I could do in my strength, in my energy, but if it doesn't come from a place of love, it means zilch, zero. What is he saying? He's saying we can knock ourselves out as Christians. We can show up and we can worship and we can serve and we can study our Bible and we can go to a small group. We can go on a mission trip. We can give. We can work. We can sacrifice. But Paul says, listen, if love isn't the motivating factor behind everything you do, at the end of the day, it means absolutely nothing. So Paul begins this great essay on love by letting us know this type of love that we're looking into, it's not an option. This isn't something you can just take or leave. Here's the second truth. Agape love doesn't separate. You know, it's interesting. Whenever I'm involved in a counseling situation and I hear that a relationship is broken down, I usually don't have to dig around very long. I don't have to ask a lot of questions until I discover that the bridge of love has been blown up. In fact, when I come across a marriage that's been blown up, I always find an absence of this kind of love that I'm talking about this weekend, either on one or both parts. In other words, it's no longer about regarding that other person in this relationship as more important than myself. Now, all of a sudden, it's about someone's needs, someone's expectations not being met. I just had a wedding last night in Roanoke, and I was sharing with a couple, marriage is an amazing thing if we live it out the way God designed it. But most people enter into marriage, what do I get out of it? What's it going to do for me? How's it going to make me a happier person? And I always tell people, God did not create marriage to make you happy. He created marriage to kill you. To kill you. And some of you are thinking it's working. It's working, right? But what I mean by that, until you get to the place in your marriage where each of you are willing to die to your own dreams, your own plans, your own goals, your ambitions, and that you're there to seek the highest good of the other individual, you'll never experience marriage the way God designed it to be experienced, right? But most of us, we have the wrong expectations and they're not being met. Whereas love draws together, all of a sudden this absence of love, which is now replaced by self-centeredness, my needs aren't being met. Well, it doesn't draw together, it separates, it divides. Let me just give you a secret. It is impossible to be self-centered and at the same time put someone else's needs above your own. Let me say that again. You cannot be self-centered. It is impossible, and at the same time care more about someone else than you care about yourself. And because of that selfishness, that self-centeredness, what always happens is somebody's expectations and needs aren't going to be met. In fact, I remember years ago sitting in my office and was talking to a young pastor, and this is what I told him. I have discovered that you can trace all relational conflict back to the absence of agape love, the love we're talking about this weekend, and the presence of selfishness. All of a sudden, someone's needs aren't being met. Their expectations aren't being met. And I know what some of you are thinking, Mike, that's so easy for you to say, but you don't know how I've been hurt. Or you don't know how I've been put in a position where I have to look out for number one. And you're right, I don't know. I do know, unfortunately, a lot of really, really bad stuff happens to some really, really good people. And I know that not everything is fixable and not all relationships can be restored. But I do know that according to verse 5 of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, this kind of love that we're talking about this weekend, Paul says, it doesn't even keep a record of wrongs. It doesn't even keep a record. It doesn't hang on to offenses. Look what he says. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. I checked this out in the Living Bible. I love to read a paraphrase every once in a while. This is what it says in the Living Bible. Love is not irritable or touchy. Let me ask you, are you touchy? Are your feelings easily hurt? Do people have to walk on eggshells around you because you're just kind of touchy? It's so funny, I've had some conversations, different individuals in different environments over the past couple of weeks, and the word that has come up several times is the word drama. And one of them asked me the other day, he says, why is there so much drama among Christians? Why is there so much drama in churches where everybody's supposed to love everyone, but there's just drama all the time? And it's just true. In fact, when I was at Hope, at one time I had almost 200 staff. And I learned after a while that so many people came onto a church staff and they thought it was their dream job. They thought it was going to be like going to Christian camp. We sat around every day holding hands, singing Kumbaya, encouraging one another and loving one another and building up one another. And so they would come on and they would tell me how excited they were to be in this new environment and this new opportunity. And I said, let me talk to you. You are getting ready to witness and experience the underbelly of Christianity. On a church staff, you're going to see more egos, more selfishness, more politics, more power struggles than you're going to see in any environment in the culture, in a secular workforce. You're going to see it all here at church. For some reason, there's something inside of us where we can be so dramatic. There is so much drama. This, I love how I put it. It's not irritable or touchy. It does not hold grudges. It will hardly notice when others do it wrong. This is what it says in the New American Standard. It does not take into account a wrong suffered. When Paul wrote that, he used an accountant's term. It has to do with putting something into a ledger of permanent record. Of course, Paul's not talking about a business ledger. He's talking about the mind. In other words, what he's saying is this. Someone who really loves this way doesn't place into the permanent memory wrongs done against them. You don't put into your permanent memory wrongs done against you. You refuse to allow your mind to become a depository for unexpressed resentment. That's powerful stuff. Do you know what I discovered? It's kind of a PSA announcement here, public service announcement. I discovered the hard way that you have to fall big time. And you have to really be rejected before you can appreciate and realize the importance of having people in your life who can love you without holding a grudge. And let me just say this. If you can't love this way, I hope you never blow it. Because we're going to see in just a minute that Jesus basically said, you want to have mercy extended to you, you better be a person who extends mercy. Here's the third thing you need to know about agape love. It has to be demonstrated. See, intentions don't really matter. You can't just talk about it. You actually have to do something. And this is important because, again, I've been around Christians for a long time. I know what some of you are thinking. You're like, Mike, I love this way. I just don't express it. I just kind of keep it inside to myself. Well, if that describes you, then you really don't understand this kind of love. Listen to how Paul describes it in verse 4. Love is patient. The word patient means long-tempered. You talked about someone who's short-tempered. This means you go a long time before you get irritated. Love is kind. It means free from petty criticism. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. We just talked about that. And then he says this, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. What do you read in those verses? Love is. Love is not. Love does. Love does not. In other words, I think what Paul is saying is when you really love this way, you can't keep it to yourself. You can't just bottle it up inside. It has to be demonstrated. It has to be expressed. There's no way you can't act on it. You have to act on it. I'll never forget one day I was driving to lunch with someone on staff and I was getting off at the off-ramp on Glenwood Avenue going toward Crabtree Valley Mall where we were having lunch. And we pulled up, there was a guy there and he had his little sign up begging. And I rolled my window down and I always kept my money clip in my little thing between the seats. And I went and grabbed my money clip and pulled off some, and he walked over and he said, "Hi, Mike." And I said, "Hey, Bill, how you doing today?" He said, "Man, just trying to make it another day." And I gave him the money. I said, "Hey, listen, good luck to you today." And I rolled the window back up. The guy beside me, he said, "You give homeless people money?" I said, "Yeah, I try to. I try not to miss them." And of course, what is the Christian standard response? Well, they're just going to spend it on drugs and alcohol, right? It's like that's our out, right? And I said, well, you know what? The minute I handed it to him, that's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to try to demonstrate the love of Jesus. It's his issue, what he does with it. But we had been doing this for so long, it actually had become, we had actually developed a relationship, right? Now, I understand, that's my thing. And if that's not your thing, you don't need to feel guilty of that. But let me ask you this. As Christians, can we just turn our heads and pretend that we don't see people who are in need? It's almost as though we're saying, that's just not my problem. But here's the thing. If I'm going to love the way God commanded me to love, I can't just say the right things. I can't just feel the right things. I actually have to do something. I just alluded to this, but when Jesus was teaching through the Beatitudes, this is what he said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 7. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. What did he mean by that? Well, when you have mercy, you have concern. This is what it literally means in the Greek. You have concern for people who are in a miserable condition, regardless of how they got in that condition, regardless if they brought it on themselves. You have mercy on people, compassion on people who are in a miserable condition. You feel what they feel. You can identify with their misery, and it compels you to take action. You don't have to take action. It compels you to take action. Now, I'm going to show you some verses, and they're going to make you squirm. Okay? Don't shoot the messenger. And don't send me an email saying that I'm a socialist. Okay? And don't say that I'm into wealth distribution, okay? I'm not into that. I think you know me better than that. I don't want to pay for anybody's student loans. And if that offends you guys, I'm sorry, right? When I went to college, I worked every day I was in college, even stocking shelves at the Winn-Dixie or working as a janitor at night after everybody went to bed. My dad worked 2 jobs the whole time I was in college so I could go to college. So I figured if you want to go to college, you figure that out. Okay, that's not my problem. I don't want to pay for that, right? I don't want to give you $25,000 to buy a house. I've helped my kids buy houses, but that was my choice. See, I don't want somebody taking my money and spending it all over the place. But you know what? There are times that I should feel compelled to do something because it's the right thing. Because I see the need and God compels me to get involved. So that's what I'm talking about. So let me show you a couple of verses. Now that I've upset everybody. Here we go. If anyone in the Greek means anyone, okay? Just so you know. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? And then John says this, dear children, let us not love with, same thing Paul said, words or speech, but with action and in truth. See, that's this kind of love. It's a demonstration. It's not an inclination. And it's not limited to just Christmas. And it's not limited to just times of disaster. This week with Helene was a horrible disaster. I mean, every time I see more on it is a horrible disaster. There ought to be something in all of us that compels us to want to do something to help. Now, let me just say this. As Be Renewed, because of your generosity, we will be making a very generous contribution to Samaritan Purse. Some of you have already asked me, what do I recommend if you wanted to get involved on your own? I would recommend two organizations, Samaritan Purse and Baptist Men. And I tell you that because they have the best structure to get things done. I remember when Katrina hit, and I learned a very valuable lesson. We were sending teams down to New Orleans. We were trying to stock trailers for food. But you know what? If you don't have the right structure, you're really just in the way. You don't have ways to get that stuff out, to get it where it's needed. In fact, you know what? We couldn't even find places for our teams to stay, so they became a burden on their own. So the best thing to do is to give to these organizations that have a phenomenal track record of using the resources that's given to them and getting it to the right places. So we will be making a hefty contribution because of your generosity through Be Renewed. But if you would like to do more on your own, I would encourage you to do that. But it shouldn't just be in times of disaster. This is what Jesus said in Matthew 5, verse 42. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Uh-oh. Now, why would Jesus go say something like that? But let me ask you a question. Do you have something that someone else could use more than you? A few months ago, Shannon and I, we had a bed that we were going to give away. It had pretty new mattress on, a good bed, but we didn't need it. We were going to give it away. We were going to sell it. And she put it on Facebook for about $150. And a guy offered $100. I said, just take it. And so he shows up in an Explorer. And his Explorer, the back of his Explorer, you know it's an SUV, it's not a truck. It is full of lawn equipment. I mean, he's got his lawnmower with the handle all bent down in there, and he's got blowers, and he's got all of his tools in the back of the Explorer. And I'm like, well, where are we going to put this bed? And he pointed to the top. And so he helped me bring it downstairs, and we're putting it up on the top of the Explorer. And I said, so I take it that you do landscaping. He said, just in the summer. He said, I'm a school teacher in Durham. And but for me to afford to live, I have to do something when I'm not teaching. And I said, what are you going to do with the bed? And he said, well, I'm a divorced single parent. My daughter lives in Atlanta, and she's getting to come and spend the summer with me. And I have a room, and I want to set it up as nice as possible. I want it to be just a really positive experience for her. And the minute he said that, Shannon said, well, we're not going to charge you for this bed. We're going to give you this bed. We're excited to give you this bed, you know? But here's the thing. We got more joy out of giving that dude that bed than we would have ever experienced from the $100 that he would have paid us. And I think that's what Jesus is saying there. And here's the other thing. That's not really ours anyway. I mean, 4 words that will change your life, God owns it all. Everything we possess, he gave it to us. He said, I want you to manage it. But here's the thing. He's given us a lot, hasn't he? But this is where we often stop talking about it. The more we have, the higher the stakes. Jesus was pretty clear. This is what he said in Luke chapter 12, verse 48. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. Let's face it, as a nation, we are blessed people. Now, you know, when Hope was growing and we didn't know why it was growing, and it was just like, oh, it's just growing. God's blessed us. I said one time in our staff meeting, for some reason, God chose to put his hand of blessing on us. He can snatch it off anytime he wants to. And in the same way, God chose to bless the United States of America. You need to understand, he can snatch that blessing off anytime he wants to, right? But for the most part, did you know that Americans, we're so blessed. I did a little research this week. Did you know that we as Americans, without really even kind of losing any sleep or breaking a sweat, we could refer what is known to in the world as stupid poverty. And stupid poverty is just basic sustenance of basic food and water. That's it. But here's the problem, or the challenge. We live in a blessed country where we have the right to any comfort we can afford. I mean, listen, everybody wants to live the American dream. I want to live the American dream. Nothing wrong with wanting to live the American dream. Who could blame us, right? I don't even think Jesus cares whether or not we get to live the American dream. But he did say this: if you're entrusted with a lot, well, just so you know, a lot's going to be expected of you. Now, this is the part that'll make you squirm. Last year, Americans spent $48 billion on bottled water. When as a nation, we have perfectly good water to drink. I think I have been to almost 50 states, including Alaska and Hawaii. I have never been in a state where I thought, I got to bring my own water. Wherever you go, you can drink the water, right? You can drink that water. But we spent $48 billion. Why? Because we can. We can. Now, let me just put it in perspective. $48 billion would drill 2.5 million wells in third world countries. 2.5 million wells would give 3 billion people clean drinking water. I'm just giving you some examples. This year, we'll spend $30 billion on Starbucks. We'll spend another $7 billion downloading ringtones. Because you can't survive on the 50 that come with the phone. You got to get some more ringtones, right? I think Jesus would just say, listen, I blessed you, but you didn't really get this lifestyle from me. Now, let me just say something. I don't think we should live in poverty. The Bible never says anything about being wealthy that it's a negative thing. There are some heavy hitters in the Bible. Abraham was wealthy. Job was wealthy. David and Solomon were filthy wealthy. Joseph of Arimathea, who gave Jesus a tomb, was a wealthy man. That's not the problem. The problem is, I don't know, maybe shouldn't we be just a little bit more willing to demonstrate the love that we say we possess? I mean, it has to be demonstrated, to whom much is given, much is expected. But are you starting to understand the power of this kind of love? See, this isn't just positive thinking type stuff. This is the kind of supernatural love. You know what? It'll help you love your boss. It'll help you love your wife, your husband, your mom, your dad, your daughter-in-law, your son-in-law. But this is also the kind of love that will come to your rescue when you've been the victim. But Paul says, see, this love doesn't separate. It draws together. It heals. It mends. It restores. You know what else it does? It allows you to be vulnerable again. Here's the fourth insight. Agape love is a long-term investment. And that's a challenge in today's world of instant gratification. In fact, I came across this description of love. Love's what you've been through with somebody. It's a long-term investment. It's not romance. It's not feelings. It's not about your happiness. As I said, I did a wedding in Roanoke last night. And there's a lot of romance, a lot of happiness, and a lot of good feelings. You know what psychiatrists tell us? 90% of what you felt, those couple felt last night, 90% of it will be gone out of the relationship within the first 2 years. What you're left with is, do you really love one another? And this kind of love that we're talking about, it has guts, it has roots, it has substance, it has staying power. You know what this love is? It's tough. This is kind of love that reaches so tightly around the other person, nothing can release the grip. I tell you what, there's a couple of guys sitting in this room this morning. When I was at my worst, they were at their best because they would not let me go down. They didn't approve of what I did, and they didn't agree with what I did, but they made it very clear, we're going to walk this journey with you. That's the kind of love I'm talking about. Now, everybody smile for a second, okay? See, I got real personal when I started talking about your Starbucks. But anyway, listen. What do we do with this kind of instruction? What do we do with it? Well, 3 responses. Here's the first one, and it's the wrong one. From here on out, I am just going to love everybody this way. That will last until someone cuts you off trying to get out of the parking lot after the service, okay? If you're really good, to tomorrow morning when you go to work, right? But it's not going to last. It won't last very long because in your own strength, I promise you, you'll fail. You just cannot man up and love this way, okay? That's not the answer. Here's the second response. I've tried it and I failed, and so it isn't worth the effort or risk. How many of you really given your heart, but somebody took it and stomped on it? And you said, I'll never do that again. This is what A.W. Tozer said. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give it to no one, not even an animal. Wrap it carefully around with hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. And then he says this, to love at all is to be vulnerable. Here's the other problem with that attitude. Romans chapter 12, verse 10 says this, be devoted to one another in love. You know what that means as a Christian? It's disobedient for us not to even try. So that option doesn't work. Here's the third response. I want to love this way, but I can't. I want to love this way, but I can't. But God, I'll tell you what I am doing. I am willing to change in this area, but you're going to have to do it through me. Now that's the right response. And when you give God that kind of freedom, he'll go to work. I remember years ago, there was a couple that I had known for years. I had known him and her, and she discovered overnight that he had a massive, massive pornography problem. Massive. I mean, it was a stronghold. And even though they had been married about 20 years, I didn't know if their marriage was going to survive, but it did. And they're married till this day. But I'll never forget when it was done. And I was talking to her one day. I said, her name was Donna. I said, Donna, how were you able to do it? And this is what she said, and I'll never forget it. She said, God, I can't love him right now. So I'm going to trust you to love him through me. And that's what God can do. It's amazing. Sometimes God just wants a willing spirit, right? And this kind of love, it's going to be awkward for some of you at first. You ever been snow skiing? First time I went snow skiing, that was the most awkward thing in the world, right? But after you figure it out, man, I've skied at ski slopes all over America. So, I mean, if you just start doing it, you know, it could become the most natural thing in the world. You could love this way in your relationships. I came across this in one of my quiet times recently. It says, if any group of Christians who claim to believe and practice all that God has said in his book will face up to their personal responsibility within the family of Christ and the real needs of their brothers and sisters and their neighbors around them, I love this, their church will impact its community with the shining goodness of God's love. Such a transformation probably would do more to attract other followers to Jesus than anything else a church could possibly do. By the way, that's why I said this school campus, this is our mission field. That's the kind of love we want them to witness. And then he said this, people are hungry for acceptance and love and friends. And then he says this, unless they find those things in the church, they may not stay there long enough to become personally related to Jesus Christ. You see now why it's so important as you come in here on the weekends, you don't just come, sit, listen, and get out, that you reach out, that you meet someone, that you ask them how they are, how their week was. Because if they don't find it, they may not stay long enough to even be able to respond to the gospel. But then this is the classic phrase. He says this, people are not persuaded, they're attracted. That's a powerful statement. No one's going to listen to me share the gospel and say, okay, you win, I'll be a Christian. No, they are attracted. We must be able to communicate far more by what we are than by what we say. And I'm guessing that's why Jesus said, they'll know you're my disciples, my followers, by the way you love one another. Now, I have a tendency to live life on the positive side a little bit. But I really believe that if we were to walk out of here and say, God, through your strength, we're going to begin to act in agape love toward other people, I believe our actions will begin to change how we feel. Donnie Darr, a guy that I pastored with for years, he used to say this, do the right thing till the feelings catch up. Just get in the habit of doing the right thing. The feelings will catch up. For example, is there somebody in your life that's a little strange? Well, if you don't have somebody in your life that's a little strange, you come see me. I have some I can share with you, right? Right? We all have people in our life that are a little strange. Listen, if you love them this way, you may discover that your disapproval turns into acceptance. Is there somebody in your life who irritates you? I mean, they just grate on you. Show them a little bit of agape love. You may discover in that process that your anger is going to be transformed into patience. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. Trust me, it takes courage. It takes courage, okay, to act better than you feel. It takes courage to be in a relationship where you know going in, I'm going to give more than I receive. But in case you're sitting here wondering, where in the world have I seen that kind of courage before? You've seen it in Jesus. See, that's cross courage right there. That's Gethsemane grit. But because Jesus built his life on this kind of love, think about this. We sitting here today who were nothing, we have the opportunity to be sons and daughters of God. That's the kind of love that I'm talking about. And I'm telling you, people all around the world wait for us to share that kind of love so that their lives can be transformed in a similar way. Dale Galloway wrote a book called Dream a New Dream. I'm going to close with this story. It's one of my favorite stories. He says, little Chad was a shy, quiet young man. One day he came home and told his mother that he'd like to make a Valentine for everyone in his class. Her heart sank. She thought, I wish he wouldn't do that. Because she had watched the children when they walked home from school. Her Chad was always behind them. They laughed and hung on to each other and talked to each other, but Chad was never included. Nevertheless, she decided she would go along with her son. So she purchased the paper and the glue and the crayons. For 3 weeks, night after night, Chad painstakingly made 35 Valentines. Valentine's Day dawned and Chad was beside himself with excitement. He carefully stacked them up, put them in a bag, bolted out the door. His mother decided to make him his favorite cookies and serve them nice and warm with a cool glass of milk when he came home from school. She just knew he would be disappointed, and maybe it would help ease the pain a little. It hurt her to think that he wouldn't get many Valentines, maybe none at all. That afternoon, she had the cookies and milk on the table. When she heard the children outside, she looked out the window. Sure enough, there they came laughing, having the best time. And as always, there was Chad in the rear. He walked a little faster than usual. She fully expected him to burst into tears as soon as he got inside. His arms were empty, she noticed. And when the door opened, she choked back the tears. Honey, I have some cookie and milk for you, she said. He hardly heard her words. He marched right on by, his face glowing, and all he could say was not a one, not a one. His mother's heart sank at first, but then she noticed the huge smile on his face as he added, I didn't forget a one, not a single one. That's agape love. There's an old saying, it's not a bell till it's rung. It's not a song till it's sung. It's not love till you give it away. Could we be known as a church with that kind of love? Without the touchiness, without hanging on to offenses, hardly even knowing when we're offended. But because we trust, maybe they're just having a bad day. Maybe something's going on in their personal life. Maybe instead of getting offended, I should check on them and see if they're okay. Can you imagine if we began to love one another that way? I'm telling you, I don't think the world's seen it since Acts chapter 2. But I don't think that Paul would have taught it if it wasn't possible. So I think it's time we raise the bar and say, this is the church that we want to be. And I believe that if we'll submit to that, that God, through his power, will take us on that journey. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for the example of your son who lived out agape love, who set aside many of his rights and attributes and stepped off of a throne, took on the form of a baby to become a servant, to give it all on our behalf so that we could become sons and daughters of God. Father, you would not hold us to this standard if it wasn't possible, but we know the only way it's possible is by you loving through us. So I pray that this will make us uncomfortable. I pray that if there's areas of life where we have an inclination, but there hasn't been any demonstration, that we'll begin to move in that area. Father, I pray that if we've hung on to grudges and little offenses, today we realize just wipe the slate clean. Just wipe the slate clean. That we'll put the past behind us and move forward. Father, I pray for those whose hearts have been broken because they did love this way. and yet someone turned it on them, maybe even used it against them, and basically said, there's just not room in my life for you. I pray that today there would be a supernatural healing in their life, and they would once again begin to experience the courage to be able to love this way again. We thank you for what you're going to do, and we're going to go ahead and give you the glory and the praise ahead of time. And it's in your holy Son's name we pray. Amen.